And here we go. We have liftoff.
Propulsion continues to be nominal.
R68 chamber pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, roll, planet.
Water towers fly! Yes! They go down to nominal.
Flight downside FD off. Bring in FD off. Off. It's orange!
Oh my god! Oh my god!
Decollage.
What is it?
Put that in the big bag,
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed.
We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
The methane would be igniting the flare, correct?
Yikes. You dead? Sure. We don't need any more of these.
Good afternoon. You are taking a live look right now at Space Launch Complex 40 at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida, where less than an hour from now we are set to see the launch of more Starlink satellites on this 12-25 mission. And, as always, this is not your ordinary Starlink, and you can kind of get a hint of why just based on the banner on the bottom of the screen, but we'll go into the details of this extra loaded Starlink launch. I'm Sawyer Rosenstein. I will be your host for today. I am not the only one here, though. I am joined by Ryan Caton. Ryan, how's it going?
Good afternoon, everybody. Wonderful conditions apart from the heat haze, but we'll overlook the heat haze. Other than that, wonderful conditions so far, and it's looking good for a launch in 57 minutes.
Yes, it looks picture perfect, and speaking of picture perfect, the one who's bringing this perfect picture to you is Max Evans in the field. How's it going, Max?
Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, it is quite unusual, it has to be said, to be seeing y'all at, I had to say, a reasonable time in the afternoon for a Starlink mission as opposed to maybe 2, 3, 4 a.m. per usual. But hey, no complaints here. Weather is great. A little bit windy, but we have clear skies, hoping to get Falcon 9 off the ground in just under 1 hour's time.
These early afternoons do be hitting different, though.
They just hit better because
Yes.
it's daytime and we're not having to be awake at, the worst hours of the morning.
That is also very nice, and it's great for the Europeans as well, including Jay Keegan, who is pushing the buttons, pulling the levers, and producing today's broadcast for you. And as Chris Bergen likes to say, this is what they see. This is what you expect when you get the travel brochures for Florida, or as my dad apparently called it, it is a Chamber of Commerce day with those clear skies. And we'll talk about the weather in just a moment. Reminder, if you have any questions, you can tag us at NASA Spaceflight, and we will do our best to answer as many of your questions as we can. Now, Ryan, this one's a little bit different. There's not 21 Starlinks on this one. What do we have launching today?
No, they've put 2 more on top. So for whatever reason, the conditions have aligned for 23 Starlink satellites for this Group 12-25 launch. It's a mix of 13 direct-to-cell satellites. So that's the constellation which Starlink has been creating in order to directly communicate with mobile phones on the ground. And then there's 10 normal bog standard, should I say, V2 mini satellites. Those will be delivered to the constellation, which communicates with all the different dishes, on your house, on your business, on your plane, on your boat, all those different land-based dishes there, or air-based if it's on a plane, I guess. But there you go. So those, I'm trying to remember what the average mass of it is now per satellite. But for whatever reason, SpaceX has decided that this specific Falcon 9 is capable of lofting 2 more satellites than normal to the 43-degree orbit.
Yeah, at last check, I think they were around, 700 kilograms? A little more?
It also depends on the different types of satellites, because obviously back in the ye olden days of V1.0 or whatever, they were launching like batches of 60 of them at a time, right? But now because of the different sizes, the different masses, they have reduced them down to approximately 21, 22, 23-ish per launch. And of course, as we can see there, a render of a direct-to-cell satellite. They're different satellite designs, right? So they are physically different sizes, the direct-to-cell and the normal V2 Mini, and of course they have different masses as well, because they're different types of satellites designed for different purposes. One's designed for communicating with teeny little cell phones on the ground, the other one designed for communicating with larger dishes, also on the ground, but bigger surface area, bigger phased array antenna.
And hopefully better connection for those of you that are on the phones. Now, we, of course, have to talk about not just what's on the booster, but the booster itself. Max, what do we have flying today, and do you mind running us through the history?
Absolutely. So over on the docket at Slick 40 is booster B1077, and this will hopefully be its 19th flight in about 53 minutes' time. Its previous 18 flights consist of Crew 5, GPS 3, SV06, Inmarsat I6F2, CRS28, Intelsat G37, NG20, TD7, and 11 previous Starlink missions. So it's not a youngster anymore. It is approaching that 20 flight barrier, and not many boosters have reached that point yet, but that number is growing fast as the Falcon 9 fleet gets older and older, and new boosters become a rarer sight. It will be heading downrange on a 43-degree inclination southeast of those living on the east coast of Florida, heading just north of the Bahamas. It will be landing on SpaceX's drone ship, a short fall of Gravitas, stationed around 600 kilometers downrange, and the vessel aiding in fairing recovery is going to be... Checking my notes really quick. Oh, goodness. I think I lost it. Oh, dear. Where? Doug, there it is. So Doug will be stationed about 60 or 70 kilometers further downrange to scoop those fairing halves out of the water should they re-enter in nominally. But B1077 will hopefully be making its 19th flight in not too long from now.
As what we're hoping for. Again, another one that is getting close to the 20 flight mark in the fleet. It's becoming a lot more rare to see the less sooty boosters, the ones that are less flown at this point than the more flown ones. And a reminder, this is just the Starlink satellites. This is different from the Crew Dragon vehicle that is set to land tonight, whereas this one is set to land towards the southeast. Ryan, where is the Crew Dragon set to land later tonight? Not in the same location.
So we have two landings. A landing and a splashdown, should we say? Anyway, we have a splashdown later tonight off the west coast of Florida that is happening with the Crew Dragon vehicle for Crew 9 that is returning with 4 astronauts on board, which I believe, off the top of my head, Commander Nick Hague and their mission specialists Alexander Gurbanov, Sunita Williams, and of course Butch Wilmore, who were from the Starliner crew. And then earlier, we have, of course, the landing of this booster, because SpaceX reuses their boosters. So we're going to have this booster landing off the east coast of Florida, kind of to the north of the Bahamas, on a shortfall of Gravitas. So two spaceflight events coming back to Earth off both Floridian coasts this afternoon/evening.
Yeah, you've got pretty far southeast, and then you have one close to Tallahassee, which is in the Panhandle. So a little bit far away, because I did see a question that was also asked here of, do you think that the liftoff or deployment will be witnessed by the returning crew? Don't know if their spacecraft will be located close enough to the...
Give me 2 moments. I believe NASA posted a little infographic displaying, yes they did, displaying the re-entry times. So the actual re-entry period for Crew 9, their Dragon capsule will begin crossing Mexico at 16:45 Central Time, which would be 17:45 Eastern Time. So that's in approximately 2.5 hours. And then about 5 minutes later is when it will actually begin its kind of final descent phase down towards the Panhandle. So that is very much outside the range of this mission. The booster for Starlink 1225 will be touching down on the deck of a shortfall of gravitas approximately 8 minutes into flight. However, and the deployment of the Starlinks will be about an hour-ish into flight. SpaceX usually confirms that via their social media channels. However, as I just said, the splashdown of Crew 9 is going to be happening at approximately 2.5-ish hours from now. We're only 49 minutes from launch, so that those two events will also be on opposite sides of the planet at that point, deployment and splashdown. So very unlikely they'll actually be able to see anything. Also, I would hope during re-entry they're strapped into their seats and not looking out the window. But
Also, shout out to Mr. Map with the dual map action there, with the re-entry planned for Crew Dragon and the trajectory for today's flight. So thank you for bringing both of those. But anyway, yeah, a lot of it, again, has to do with phasing, as it's called. So basically, where is everything located? Where is the ISS? Where is Crew Dragon? Do they have the potential to be flying overhead? And, I mean, you would think that with the trajectory coming for a splashdown in Florida in a couple hours from now only, that they might have a chance, but based off of where Crew Dragon is right now, I don't think they're going to be able to make it all the way around the globe in time. You can see this is a simulation with live data coming from Crew Dragon of where it's located. And right now, it appears to be making its way over...
It's definitely not over Africa. I can confirm that.
Eastern Europe, towards the side of Russia there, working its way near India. So, complete opposite side of the globe from the view on the right side of your screen here in Florida. So, I don't think they'll be able to, but that would be very cool. What's also very cool is Bideford gifting 5 Red Team memberships. Always good to see you here, Bideford. Thank you so much for the support there. And if you got one of those gifted memberships, please make sure you give her a thank you. Connor Walsh with an interesting question here. Are the Falcon turnaround times from the time of launch or landing? I think we would need to check with Alex on that exactly. But Max, do we know what the booster turnaround time is for this one?
So Alex in the back channel is stating that turnaround is from launch to launch. So the time begins at the time of launch, of course. So the booster turnaround time for this, if I read the facts correctly, was around 35 days. I lost the thread here. Give me one moment.
You are correct.
Yep.
About 35 days. Yep. So to be precise, assuming the T0 holds, it'll be 35 days, 1 hour, and 4 minutes, and 30 seconds to be 100% precise. But the booster refurbishment, depending on how many flights it's had, varies anywhere from around 30 to 37 or 38 days, although we have seen under 30 days on a number of occasions, even though that is pretty rare nowadays. But yeah, typically around the 30 or 35 day mark is the typical time for a refurb on a Falcon 9 first stage.
Indeed. And this booster in particular, data from Next Spaceflight, App Store, Google Play, website, all of those things, a record turnaround of 29 days for this specific booster, B1077, average reuse time of 51 days. And as Max said, this specific mission, assuming it launches in 46 minutes time, will be a 35-day turnaround from its previous flight.
Too shabby. Not too shabby. And I know Keith is wondering, do you still keep track of Starlink milestones? I believe the number of total launches, reentries may be significant soon. Any comments? I think there's somewhere where eventually we show the total number of Starlink launches and everything, especially at the end of the month, right, Ryan?
Well, actually, at the end of every week. So every Friday after the Flame Trench, we publish This Week in Spaceflight, our weekly news show with Alicia hosting. So if you want all of the Starlink details, we go over all of the total number of Starlinks launched, the total number of Starlinks that have re-entered the atmosphere, and then the total number of Starlinks which are currently in their operational orbit. So, initially, Starlinks are launched to approximately a 300-kilometer circular orbit, and then they independently raise their orbits up to their operational orbit, which is around 400, 500 kilometers. And then when they reach their end of life, they then descend and then re-enter the atmosphere. So those 3 key numbers every single week, assuming there's a Starlink launch that week, we feature that in This Week in Spaceflight.
Max, how many total now is this for Starlink dedicated?
So just for Starlink missions, they have had Starlink satellites ride on a few transporter missions, and they've had some ride shares, other ride shares as well. But just for dedicated missions for Starlink, this will be the 241st flight just for a Starlink payload, which is pretty remarkable because most rockets haven't even flown 240 times, let alone landed over 241 times. So to have 241 launches dedicated to Starlink now, and mind you, the constellation is going to get much bigger than it is now. So there is still a ton left to come.
That's the crazy part.
Remarkable.
Yeah, that's the crazy part. They're not done, and they'll have to continually launch more as the older satellites intentionally burn up, given their very low orbits. Now, the numbers you see on the screen there, the 34th launch of the year already in March, and 8th so far this month, 96th consecutive Falcon launch since a previous failure. And this is very interesting. So there's a bunch of caveats with the number, but take a look at this. This is Falcon 9's 448th orbital flight. Add in, if we're talking missions though, add in the in-flight abort test, IFA, would make it 449. And while it did not ever launch, if you add in Amos 6, this will be the 450th planned Falcon 9 mission. Again, different from launched, but this would be the 450th planned Falcon 9 launch. Holy smokes!
That is certainly a big number. And for context, right, the Atlas V has only launched 101 times, and it's been operating. The Atlas family has heritage far beyond Falcon 9, and it's launched like 25% less of Falcon 9's total missions to date, which is remarkable, absolutely remarkable.
And 240 of them from Slick 40, which is currently the busiest active launchpad in the world. Also, ASOG, a shortfall of Gravitas, batting almost a perfect record, 102 out of 103 attempts, and the 241st, as Max mentioned, launch dedicated to Starlink. That is unbelievable here, folks. The numbers continue to grow. Meanwhile, the clock continues to count down towards liftoff, which as of right now is scheduled for 3:57 p.m. Eastern Time. The window does remain open until 6 p.m. Eastern if necessary. But Max, what was the official forecast for today?
So as you can probably see from all of our feeds, not just here but also on Space Coast Live, there is tons of blue sky out today. There is a bit of a breeze coming out from the north, but the latest forecast from the 45th Weather Squadron only predicted and forecasted a 5% chance of unfavorable weather conditions. So realistically, that's about as good as you can get. Of course, for crew, the forecast was less than 5%. Was less than. What is English? My brain is just fried. The weather for crew was absolutely perfect. There was a less than 5% chance of a weather violation, and today it's 5%. So realistically, it's about as good as we can get, even though the heat haze is not the most visually appealing. But weather is looking great today. There is also, well, that being said, there is a little bit of a point of concern with the booster recovery weather being of moderate concern, but we have seen Falcon launch and land in conditions far worse than that. So weather-wise, it is looking great today.
And most of those have come back, thankfully, after landing in those conditions. Keyword most.
Keyword most, exactly.
We're coming up now on about 40 minutes to go, which would be the beginning of the real meat of the countdown here, the meat and potatoes of it. Ryan, do you mind putting some meat on those bones and explaining what is remaining here in the countdown, what we can expect?
So we are approaching T-minus 38 minutes, which is when the launch director at SpaceX will verify a go for propellant load. This is a procedure which sets Falcon 9 apart from pretty much every other orbital rocket in the world. Falcon 9 loads and goes, which means that the super chilled propellants which are loaded on board Falcon 9, they do that in the last 35 minutes rather, of the count, right? Other vehicles, they fill them up with fuel sometimes days before the flight. They don't do that with Falcon 9 because they want to extract every single percentage of performance they can out of this vehicle. So they load it in the last 35 minutes. So at 38 minutes to go, the launch director will verify that they are go for propellant load, if indeed they are. 35 minutes, the RP1, that's the rocket grade kerosene, basically even more refined jet fuel, that will begin loading onto the vehicle, and the liquid oxygen, that's the oxidizer for the first stage, so that'll also begin loading at 35 minutes to go. 16 minutes to go, the second stage will join with its liquid oxygen loading, and at 7 minutes to go, its engine chill on the first stage will begin. So the Merlin 1Ds, there's 9 of them on that first stage. That's where Falcon 9 gets its name from, 9 engines on the first stage. Those need to be chilled down prior to launch, because if you were not previously aware, rocket exhaust very, very hot, propellant very, very cold. These two things are on completely different ends of the spectrum, so you need to condition your engines just right. Because if you start flowing really, really cold propellant into your engine, but your engine's still at room temperature, your engine's not going to have a good day. It's going to be thermally shocked, right? So you need to condition your engines so they're ready to accept that super chilled propellant and turn it into really, really hot exhaust. At 1 minute to go, the flight computer on board will begin its final pre-launch checks. The tank pressurization will begin, so they'll pressurize the tanks up to flight pressure. 45 seconds to go, the launch director will once again verify a go, this time for launch, fingers crossed. 3 seconds to go, the engine ignition sequence will begin for all those 9 Merlin engines, and then at T0, fingers crossed, we'll see that strong back throwing all the way back as far as it goes, and liftoff of Falcon 9.
Thank you, Ryan. That is what we will all hope to see just about 38 minutes from now. And we will know if they are go for propellant load once we start seeing frost on that vehicle. So usually around T minus 33, 32-ish minutes is when we'll start to see that frost line form. See if we can see it through the trees, which KSE, it would be nice if you could trim more of the trees for us, please. K, thanks.
Please and thanks. Please and thanks.
Austin Skirvin with a $5 tip at tips.nasaspaceflight.com saying, I was at KSC in the Cape earlier this weekend and got to see the Saturday morning Starlink and got a couple cool photos and a video. It was awesome. Pics posted in the Discord. That's so cool, Austin. I'm glad you got to see one. It's thankfully becoming a lot more common now to be able to see launches once you come down to Florida. And I just want to point out, your picture's spectacular, I'm sure. I'll have to go into the Discord and look. Max and Julia also got some amazing, amazing shots of that sunrise launch that you can now get at shop.nasaspaceflight.com. And members, if you're a member, you've probably seen some of these photos as well as a perk. Definitely go check them out. Max, you guys killed it.
Yeah, that was a fun one. I mean, it's not often that you get a rocket launching at either sunrise or sunset so close, and to have the sun right on the horizon just behind Slick 40 at a very specific point in Titusville was an absolute sight to behold. So I'm super glad that it worked out as well as it did.
And along those lines, I'll throw this one to you, Max. Arrow is asking, speaking of travel to Florida, what is the best way to plan a Florida trip for a space nerd?
Well, it depends on what mission you are targeting. I would recommend that crew launches are the easiest to target from farther out, because those dates have to be firm for any ISS operations, and any slips will be publicized at some point or another, hopefully well in advance, unless you get within a week of launch. So I would plan. I mean, always seeing a crew launch is always special anyway. Seeing 4 people or any amount of people leaving the bounds of Earth heading to orbit is always special. But feel free to check out our app, Next Spaceflight. We have the most up-to-date dates as well as we can. And then I would recommend spacing out probably, if you can budget for it, I would give yourself about a week, just in the event of any scrubs or any further delays before launch. That will hopefully give you a larger window to actually see the main launch. But in the meantime, of course, SpaceX is launching Starlink missions left, right, and center, so you are bound to catch one of those in the meantime, either before or afterwards, if you have that spare time left over, assuming the crew launch goes on time. But I would give yourself about a week, and also stay up to date with the dates as they shift on our app, Next Spaceflight.
And if you're trying to do the actual planning itself, a lot of times you're going to fly into Orlando. So just keep in mind, if you get a hotel in Orlando, it can, depending on traffic, be almost an hour drive to the Kennedy Space Center, Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in that area. So if you are staying in Orlando, keep that in mind. if you are planning solely to do space things, then you might consider getting something closer to Port Canaveral, Cape Canaveral, Titusville, Cocoa Beach, that area. Definitely set some time aside for the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex. They have some fantastic options there and some good viewing spots. And as Max mentioned, always check out the potential for launches with the apps. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah,
Hopefully we'll
that's
see you
exactly
there.
what I did in 2023. I booked a couple weeks to go and see Psyche, the Falcon Heavy. It did slip a couple days, but luckily the trip was long enough to see the launch. And then that was in the morning, and later in the evening there was a bonus Starlink as well, a beautiful sunset Starlink from Launch Complex 40. So icing on top of the cake. So these days you are bound to see a Starlink launch unless something catastrophic happens, like I don't know, Falcon 9 falls over upon landing and they do a mishap investigation. So unless you're going with Alex, you'll probably be all right.
You beat me to it, yes.
Hey.
Yeah, Alex came and then Falcon didn't fly for a while after that, so yeah. Anyway. Well, twice apparently, Jay pointing out in the background. Oh, we love you, Alex. It's out of love, but please stay away from scrubbing Starlinks and Falcons.
He's our bad luck charm in person.
Let's get back to actual questions here. Creative Bites is wondering, Ryan, with a 5-year lifespan on a Starlink, does that mean perpetual launches to continually replace old ones in the future?
That is pretty much what we're expecting, right? They don't want to be running these satellites forever because technology evolves, and the technology. You can see the V1 of the Starlink dish, like the thing you buy and put on top of your house. You can see the V1 of the Starlink dish versus they now have Starlink Mini, which is like a third of the size, right? And you can get internet through this iPad-sized phased array antenna, right? So technology over 5 years evolves quite significantly. SpaceX wants to eventually be on a fully Starlink V3 and beyond constellation. These are the huge satellites they want to launch on Starship, right? Which are capable of, I forget the specifics, but Dan Hewitt on the SpaceX stream was saying that one single launch of Starship Starlink-sized satellites would be, a order of magnitude more bandwidth to the constellation than what they can do with 10, 20, 30 Falcon launches, right? So these huge Starlink satellites, they'll want to replenish the entire constellation eventually. And that's what it's designed to do. The reason they launch to their altitudes is not only for latency to the ground, but also it makes deorbiting these satellites really quite easy and very, very simple. And in the event that a satellite fails, eventually it'll drift its way back down, right? So that is the eventual goal of the Starlink constellation.
So you're talking while muted?
Yeah, it turns out talking to yourself, it makes you need to see a psychiatrist and check your mute button. Brian Moore, though, was asking along those lines, will these full-size V2, V3s, whatever they end up being called, have these direct-to-cell capabilities as well?
Well, although they are launched together, even right now, I think it's important to clarify, direct-to-cell Starlinks and V2 mini Starlinks are two completely different satellites, and they're essentially serving their own constellations, kind of, right? So the V2 mini Starlinks are for serving those Starlink dishes on the ground, on boats, on planes, on your car, on your truck, whatever, right? However, the direct-to-cell satellites are just for those direct-to-cell capabilities, just for providing bandwidth to mobile phones on the ground. So they're two different satellites designed for two different purposes. Don't think we've seen any direct-to-cell V3 Starship-sized satellites or heard anything of that yet. I would not be surprised if that's something that happens in the future. All we've seen right now are the ambitions for, I think all we've seen so far are the ambitions for the V3 Starlink normal internet service satellites, right? And the last two Starship flights have been attempting to deploy those simulators, which are of a similar size, obviously not a fully fleshed out satellite, just Jack calls them dumblinks, basically just a boilerplate Starlink with a similar kind of deployment mechanism so they can test that PES dispenser, satellite dispenser system on Starship.
Right, and again, these, as pointed out, the fact that these are meant to replace the older ones as they go. We've seen that happen. We've seen, as Alex was pointing out in the back channel, launches go to the exact same inclination as some of the original V1s, V1.5s before they switch to these. As they start to stop working and degrade and deorbit, you can just launch more and replace them. And I think the most impressive part, as you pointed out, is the fact that all of the equipment on the ground still works, whether you are using the V1, V2 satellite or V2 mini satellites, the older or newer receivers, all of that still works. So that is really cool. And yeah, we'll see if we see more direct to cell in the future, because I think the original plan was to have more direct to cells through Starship and more of the regulars through Falcon, but we shall see.
I mean, the whole reason we call these satellites the V2 mini satellites is because they are a mini version of what were meant to be the V2 satellites, the full-size V2 satellites, which were going to launch on Starship. But, you know, Starship still isn't in a place. SpaceX has been launching these V2 minis, in quotes, for like 1 or 2 years now. Starship still isn't in a place where they have the capability to actually launch payload to orbit on Starship, right? The last 2 flights have very much shown that with their current iteration of the second stage of the Starship, the Block 2, they still can't complete an ascent burn. You know, if they can't even get into a suborbital trajectory, there's no way they can get to orbit, right? So they still need to work out and develop Starship to a place where they can deploy satellites. So Starlink is kind of, you know, maybe Starlink would be a little bit further where it is now if Starship wasn't, you know, kind of lagging behind a little bit. But, you know, we shall see.
Or as Alex pointed out, we shall see. Because the way these launch into shells, that's the name of the groups of the satellites that they go up, they're into shells, so we shall see, we shall see. It's funnier when you explain it. Also, it's harder when there's no actual laughter because there's only 2 other people with their microphones unmuted on the call. Anyway, we are keeping an eye out for frost on the vehicle, Max. It's kind of hard to tell with the trees and the heat haze, but any possible hint of frost?
So I'm trying to get a good look behind the brush based on how I have the camera mounted today back here on the press site lawn. It's a bit difficult to tell, but the brush that is in the way of the top of the RP1 tank and the bottom of the LOX tank, occasionally when that blows out of the way, I believe I can see a ring of frost at the bottom of the LOX tank. And we would have to by now if they were going to go into prop load for this current window. So I think I can see some, but we will find out more in just a handful of minutes whether or not they are officially in prop load or not.
I mean, obviously the biggest indicator would be the 20-minute vent, but hopefully we'll see some more indication of frost before that.
And it's also a lot easier to tell if they are in prop load with a sootier booster compared to a cleaner booster, because Falcon 9 naturally is white, so it is dark, and the white contrasts against the dark soot a lot more than it does against a shiny or only a somewhat dirty tank structure. So fingers crossed, we should see something here in the next couple of minutes. If we, I think I see frost on the bottom of the LOX tank there. Somebody zoom in or enhance, but I think we can.
It appears, I mean, I'm starting to see a little bit, it looks like just above the tree line. It is hard to tell, but that is what we are looking for here. The frost line to form, which would mean the liquid oxygen and RP1, rocket propellant 1, would be flowing into that first stage. It's also hard to tell on the second stage, given the white intertank, as well as the fact that it loads the RP1 first before the supercooled liquid oxygen.
Yeah, you know what, chaps? I believe I do see frost on the bottom of the LOX tank there.
Through the bushes, you can see it, so it appears that they are fueling. And a reminder that with Falcon 9, once it fuels, it is committed to its T0 time. So with fueling, oh yeah, you can definitely see it now. With fueling 100%. Underway, that means that they are set for the 3:57 p.m. Eastern launch time. For those who might not know why, Ryan, why is it that once they start the fueling, they're committed?
It's all to do with that load and go procedure that I was talking about earlier, right? So they, with Falcon 9, SpaceX uses these super chilled propellants. So these are cooled down basically to the lowest temperature that they can, because a colder propellant means that it's more dense, which means they can fit more propellant in. And the more propellant you can fit in for the same mass means that you can carry more payload into space, if that makes sense, right? You technically have more fuel for the same mass, if that makes sense. So that means they can have these super efficient launch ascent profiles and carry much more mass into space. As we were saying earlier, 23 Starlink satellites on board. That's quite a hefty payload they're delivering to low Earth orbit, or at least they intend to today. So because of this super chilled propellant, once it's on board, they need to go. If they wait, that propellant can boil off, that propellant can warm up, that propellant will lose its efficiency, and they may no longer be able to carry their assigned payload to its assigned orbit. So that's why we have this load and go. Once you start fueling with Falcon 9 at T-minus 35 minutes, that's your cutoff point. Once you're fueling, you've got to go.
Yeah, the way I kind of think of it, I don't know if this is going to make sense to anyone, but if you're trying to put leftovers in a container and the container lid isn't really fitting right, so you push down on the leftovers as tight as you can, and at the last second you snap that container closed and it stays closed. That's kind of what the load and go is like, versus one where, all right, the container's kind of full, but the lid will still fit on, so there's no pressure to get the lid on before it pops. I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody, but that's kind of the way I think about it. We are now 24 minutes away from this launch, and do have a couple questions about other launches here, including one about Falcon Heavy. Max, do we know when we could see another Falcon Heavy from the Cape?
Unfortunately, I don't think so. I think that we're rumored to be around a couple this year, but we have not seen any so far on the manifest. It's kind of rare to see a Falcon Heavy fly nowadays. I really hope sooner rather than later. I think I heard rumors about one happening perhaps in early summertime, but we have seen nothing so far on the manifest.
Yeah, so holding off on Falcon Heavy for now. Hopefully, we will get to see that this year. I think there's at least one kind of scheduled for the end of the year on next spaceflight. So we'll see if that ends up loading and going.
Yeah, so we have net December, the Griffin mission 1, the lunar lander for Astrobotic, and then we have 2 Space Force missions, 75 and 70, which are just net 2025. And whenever you see net year, you know there's no chance of a precise launch date. So I'm pretty sure those will just go whenever the Space Force feels like it.
Yeah,
Right.
and when also with those being Space Force payloads, they are of course subject to heavy slippage, I guess you could say. So I would not bank on those going this year, but you never know.
And heavy secrecy, too, with them being typically military or Department of Defense, Space Force payloads. They're usually a lot more tight-lipped about exact T-zeros with those. Let's see. Michael Jones with a question here. Any word on what was on fire around Slick 40 yesterday? Did we see fire around there?
There were a couple of prescribed burns, I'm pretty sure. It's something that we see pretty often around the Cape, just the local, I don't know if law enforcement is the right terminology, but the local officials keeping track on all of the wildlife and vegetation and whatnot. Because, of course, this Cape Canaveral and the Kennedy Space Center, right? This is a huge area. Not only do we have launch pads, but there's also a lot of wildlife conservation, looking after the environment, all of that stuff as well. So just general normal stuff, keeping track of the foliage and what's going on with the vegetation at the Cape.
Exactly. There was a lot of brush, a lot of trees, a lot of wild items in the area, and of course some of that can become a fire risk later in fire seasons, so they will do these prescribed burns in its place to clear out any dead debris, dead trees, things that might potentially catch fire, especially if it gets struck by lightning as we get towards the heavy lightning season in the summer for Florida. So those prescribed burns are normal, and as you pointed out, for those who are unaware, the Kennedy Space Center and parts of the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station are indeed part of the Merritt Island Wildlife Preserve. So it is actually a wildlife reserve area that's meant for preservation. You'll see eagles, you'll see egrets, you'll see ospreys, all different kinds of things, turtles, all around there. So that is why we will see those burns. That's totally normal. What's also totally normal is to see venting coming out of the strongback at the T-minus 20 minute and 20 second mark. I thought I timed it exactly. There it goes. It's off by a couple seconds. Ryan, what is the venting that we're seeing now here?
So that aligns with the timeline on the left. You can see there the liquid oxygen chill down. This venting, pretty much just to make sure there's nothing in the pipes that shouldn't be in the pipes, right? When you're flowing through, similar to what I was saying earlier with the engines, right? You don't want any thermal shock. You don't want any debris. You don't want anything in there that shouldn't be in there. You want your plumbing to be ready to get that LOX loading underway on the second stage, which is why they have the T-minus 20-minute vent, just to make sure that everything coming after the vent goes as swimmingly as possible.
Yeah, we want everything to be pretty chill with the rocket, including the lines. Not even a groan from Max? Wow. Anyway, that vent will go on till about the T-minus 16-minute mark, and that is when we will hopefully see the vent stop, which will indicate that the liquid oxygen load is indeed underway on stage 2 of this vehicle, which the booster for this mission, by the way, booster 1077-19, launching from Space Launch Complex 40 at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida on the Starlink 12-25 mission, which I did see a question, I believe it was Sebi was asking, what's with the mission naming 12-25, Ryan?
Well, the 1225 where do we begin, Sawyer? Where do we begin? So these launches are not launched in the sequential order in which they are numbered, right? However, they basically SpaceX sets out a manifest of Starlink flights. So they'll say this is the 25th mission of Group 12. I'll get to the groups in a minute, but this is the 25th mission of Group 12. This is not necessarily the 25th launch in that order, right? So it's not like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm not sure specifically in that sequential order which launch of Group 12 this is, but it is the 25th mission SpaceX has assigned. The groups, on the other hand, essentially is a simple-ish way of denoting what kind of satellites are on board, what kind of orbit it's going to. So there are various different shells that these Starlink satellites go to. Say there's some launches that are entirely V2 mini, there's some launches which are a mix of V2 mini and direct to cell, there's some launches that go to 43-degree orbits, there's some launches that go to 50-degree orbits, I think there's some launches that go to 53-degree orbits, maybe some that go to 70. There's various different launch inclinations and launch altitudes for all of these different shells. The group number is simply a way of trying to denote what satellites are going where, although it can be a little inconsistent. I don't think anyone would give SpaceX the consistent and accurate naming award because they seem to change their naming standards every 5 minutes.
Yeah, it seems to be taking after another vehicle with weird mission numbers, say the Space Shuttle, which would do the same thing. There you go, you got your mentor, folks. Where they had a strange naming convention. In fact, we talk about why they changed it back in the most recent Shuttle Sunday that just happened this past week. That will be up on the YouTube channel very soon. But yeah, they would assign it a number, and then if it moved, it would keep the same number regardless of where it was in the slot. So same thing with these Starlink missions, just to try and confuse everybody and make it more difficult to keep track. With 16 minutes to go, it looks like that vent is stopping, so fueling continuing to be underway for booster 1077 and its second stage. Max, can you kind of remind us the history and here of booster 1077-19 and where it's set to land today?
Yes, so as that nomenclature you just talked about suggests, this would be 1077's 19th flight, so it's not a young booster anymore. It is quickly approaching that 20 flight barrier, but its previous flight history includes, it started out in life with Crew 5, GPS-3, SV-06, Inmarsat I-6F2, CRS-28, Intelsat G37, NG-20, TD-7, and 11 previous Starlink missions. So it is not a youngster, it is full of soot, and it is rapidly approaching that 19 flight mark, hopefully in just about 15 minutes time.
That is what we're hoping, and of course, a shortfall of gravitas located downrange to hopefully catch the booster, which so far it's caught 102 out of 103 attempts. And Doug is the one downrange to try and recover the fairing halves. That's the clamshell white structure at the very top of the vehicle you see there that splits into two. It has thrusters and parachutes that will then help guide it down to be scooped up, brought back to the Cape, refurbished, and flown again and again.
I just realised a nice little bit of symmetry with this. I'm just going through next space flight. This booster also launched Starlink 625 as well as 1225.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Lovely symmetry.
This booster also launched NG20, which I'm sure is a stream our operator Jay Keegan would love to remember.
Oh no.
Let's not bring that one back. That was anyway, let's continue along here talking about this mission. Here's an interesting question from Creative Bites, who says this might be silly, but are the tanks on the ship, so I'm guessing they mean for Falcon 9 here, loaded from the top down or the bottom up? Ryan, do we know?
I would assume it's bottom up because of gravity.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense in the long run. And it is worth noting that the first stage is loaded simultaneously with the RP-1 and the LOX. That's Rocket Propellant 1 and Liquid Oxygen. Meanwhile, the second stage is staggered, starting with that RP-1 and currently loading up with LOX, as we are 13 minutes and 30 seconds away from the T0 for today's Starlink 12-25 launch. And Max, it's a little hard to see these launches, I know, during the daytime, but if someone were to go out and try to look, what direction would they need to look for this one?
Yeah, that's the unusual thing. It's rare to see a Starlink mission launching so well into daytime now. It's genuinely a rarity because normally we see them going off anywhere from 11 p.m. local to anywhere from 3 to 4 a.m. local. That's the prime time for Starlinks, it seems usually. But daytime visibility can be difficult because obviously the exhaust doesn't have a dark sky to contrast against, but that doesn't mean you can't see it from far away. And with Falcon 9 heading southeast today, I would recommend anywhere south of Port Canaveral, like Cocoa Beach, Satellite Beach, anywhere near the port, or Jetty Park, right near the mouth of Port Canaveral, because it'll be flying basically directly over you, and it will have a great side-on profile as it heads downrange. That's not to say that if you're north of the launch pad, like around Playa Linda Beach, going up towards Daytona, that you won't see it, but your view will be, I guess, less optimal because the rocket will be flying away from you as opposed to about perpendicular to you if you are south of the launch pad. So for anyone who is south of the pad around the areas I had just mentioned, you are in for quite a show because the skies are crystal clear.
Absolutely, and this one is going southeast, so those especially along the southeastern part have a better chance to see it, especially if it is before main engine cutoff, because after that point it can be quite difficult to track. And if you are along those areas, also, you might just see the contrail, so keep an eye out for it, anyone who's in Florida there. And if you do happen to catch any pictures or video of it, you can send it to us on all of our social media accounts. We are on X, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and TikTok. So if you do see it, tag us, please. We'd love to see what you see. And of course, you'll be able to see all of our photography from these events and all of our highlights on those social media channels if you give them a follow. Which I know photography-wise, this last week, the team has just been unbelievable with the recent launches, including the Starlinks, including Crew 10 that recently launched. I mean, it's so spectacular. I wish we could see some of them. Maybe on the store at shop.nasaspaceflight.com where they're available as prints. Hey, well, that was convenient, Jay. What do you know? These are some of the prints that are available at shop.nasaspaceflight.com. They come in both metal prints as well as in high-quality posters. So there's all different kinds of missions there. You've got everything for Starship. If you like the Cape stuff, you have the Cape launches, including this shot from Mr. Max Evans himself, who's on the stream here. God, that's a gorgeous shot of an early morning Starlink launch from just the other day. Beautiful detail. So you got the close-up view, which is Max's. You have a wider view, which is Julia's. And if you wanted something from Crew 10, you also have the flag shot, which was mine. So all of these at shop.nasaspaceflight.com. And a reminder, a portion of the sale does go to the photographer. So it's a way to also support your favorite photographer. Boy, you think I'd do shorts for the channel or something. We are now under 10 minutes away from the scheduled launch here. Ryan, what can we expect in this final 10 minutes coming up?
So the key milestones coming up, 7 minutes to go. That's when that engine chill will begin. So just like with the lines on the strongback, SpaceX wants to make sure that the Merlin 1D engines, all 9 of them on the first stage, are chilled down and ready to accept that super cold propellant, and they won't be thermally shocked when that propellant starts rushing through, say, a room temperature engine. That wouldn't be great. Then down to 1 minute to go, the onboard flight computer, that'll begin its pre-launch checks. Alongside that, the tank pressurization for those propellant tanks, they'll start pressurizing up to flight pressure, so they're all stiffened up and ready to go at T0. 45 seconds to go, that's when the launch director verifies if they are go or no-go for launch. Fingers crossed they'll say they are go for launch. 3 seconds to go, the engine ignition sequence will begin for those first stage engines, and then of course T0, the vehicle should lift off from the pad. That strongback will fall back, and Falcon 9 will begin reaching for the skies. And I actually have a little bit of a quick breaking-ish news update, because Starlink has officially confirmed, convenient for a Starlink stream, that they have surpassed 1 million active Starlink Roam customers. So these are the customers that have the ability, that have the dishes that allow them to move around the world. The Roam plan allows you to bring your Starlink with you and connect on the go. So I believe they surpassed 1 million fixed site customers many months ago. Starlink now confirming they have surpassed 1 million active Roam customers, so that's over 1 million people now able to travel the globe and stay connected to the internet via Starlink.
That is actually really cool. And yeah, Starlink very widely used now. In fact, at NSF, we use it on occasion for certain launches, especially when there's a lot of other people around and the cell signals might get busy. Starlink is a great resource to be able to use that. That's actually what I was communicating on during the Crew 10 launch. But that engine chill is set to come up in about 30 seconds from now. So we are getting that much closer to the launch. And again, a reminder that this launch is an instant now that it has started fueling. So it either goes in 7 minutes and 20 seconds or it does not. And Max, I know there's people asking, is there people on this? Is this related to Crew 9? Can you just kind of differentiate the Starlink versus the Crew 9 splashdown?
Yeah, so this is way different than what is happening around 6 p.m. local with the Crew 9 Dragon splashdown in the Gulf of Mexico. This is a completely separate occasion where Falcon 9 is just launching 23 Starlink satellites into orbit, heading southeast today over the Atlantic Ocean. So way different, and this will be happening. Oh, I said Gulf of Mexico instead of Gulf of America. Excuse me to be official. But yeah, this is a totally different occasion, and based on the times in between them, they should not conflict in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, so this one has no people on it. This one just has the 23 Starlink V2 mini satellites, including ones with the direct-to-cell capability on it. So that will not have people on this launch. The other one that is coming back is just a crew capsule. And again, that is splashing down sort of near the Tallahassee area of Florida. I'll say that. But thankfully, we are not the only ones out on this gorgeous day. We also have another feed out there from the fantastic Wade, Dr. WD-40. That looks like that is out near the Max Brewer Bridge, if I am seeing that correctly. Another great viewing spot, which you can see all the viewing spots in the video we have on how to view a launch at the Florida areas. But this is another great opportunity to see the launch. He's a great educational outreach streamer, does all bunch of cool things, metal detecting, obviously launches. So thank you, Wade, for bringing this out. And we're coming up on 5.5 minutes. Max, the skies look pretty clear. Can we get a final weather check before we send you off to operate all the cameras?
Sure thing. Yeah, weather is looking great. There is still a bit of a breeze coming in from the north, but it is nothing approaching the limits of what Falcon 9 can do. So that appears to be no obstacle as SpaceX is pushing along to launch Starlink 12-25 here in just over 5 minutes. But weather's looking great, clear skies ahead, and hopefully, gentlemen, I will see y'all on the other side because it is about that time.
We will see you afterwards. Looking forward to your track and the videos that you will bring us. So at 4.5 minutes, that is when the strong back will retract just a couple of degrees, 1.8 degrees. It's a little hard to see the structure in this viewpoint, but can you talk about the strong back, what it does, and the retraction process, both just before launch and at launch?
Indeed, very helpfully, SpaceX, for whatever reason, has decided to construct a crew access tower right in front of our view of the strongback here. But either way, the strongback is essentially a platform that allows SpaceX to integrate the vehicle horizontally and then roll it out to the pad. So there we go. We have a call out from SpaceX confirming that the strongback retract has begun. So essentially, unlike Starship, for example, unlike SLS, unlike the shuttle, unlike Saturn V, how many more rockets do you want me to name? Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy are integrated horizontally. So they are horizontal in the hangar, they are then rolled out on this strongback, and then they are erected on the pad to stand vertical. The strongback then provides all of the different feed lines, all of the different pressurization lines, all the different propellant lines to allow the vehicle to be pressurized, to be fueled up. That's a beautiful close-up view there of that strongback retract. And essentially, it gives the vehicle support, so it can stay vertical at the pad. It gives it structural support, and it also gives it that fuel and pressurization support as well. For this strongback design and for the design at Slick, whoa, I nearly said a very cursed thing. At Launch Complex 39A, the strongback designs are such that they will retract a little bit initially, and then they will throw back all the way at T0. However, the strongback design at Slick 4 East at Vandenberg in California, that actually throws back quite significantly a good period of time before flight. So those are two differences between the older strongback style for Falcon 9 and the newer strongback style, which we can see here at 40 and also across the way at Complex 39A.
And speaking of older, this is definitely an older booster on 19 flights now, 1077-19. You can also see some of the soot and dirt on the fairing halves. Again, those the white sort of closed structure at the top. You can see some dirt and soot on them, indicating that these are very likely previously flown fairing halves. And those are jettisoned and recovered. There is Doug downrange to go pick them up once they parachute back down. We should be getting callouts shortly on fuel loading wrapping up in different parts of the vehicle. So we will have the completion of fueling, hopefully, about 90 seconds before launch, and we'll also see a giant vent for one final purge of all of the lines of any potential liquid oxygen that may be remaining in them, because liquid oxygen plus fire is usually a bad thing. Now, 2 minutes to go. So far, everything looks good at this point.
Stage 2, lock slow complete.
And there is the call out. Liquid oxygen loading is complete on the second stage. That means that we should have a fully fueled rocket, and Max capturing that vent there, as mentioned, purging the lines. 90 seconds to go until liftoff. The next thing that we should... Go ahead.
It looks like Max has engaged the super zoom mode there on his lens, so fingers crossed we'll have a close-up view for track.
That is the hope. So the next things that we'll hear will be Falcon 9 entering startup, with the onboard computers taking control of the count. That's also when they pressurize the tanks to flight level. And then after that, at T-minus 45 seconds, is when we should get the go for launch. They're on a slight delay with the audio feed from our cameras, so you'll hear them a couple seconds after. But let's listen out for that call out for startup.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
There we go. Now, the hope is that we will hear that go for launch from the launch director. That would be LD.
The launch director is go for launch.
There we go. 30 seconds to go now. We will, of course, be quiet once it lifts off and let you enjoy the sounds of Falcon 9 from the KSC press site, 20 seconds away. It does take a couple seconds for the sound to get to us, though. Here we go. We're now 10 seconds away from launch. Keep an eye at the base of the rocket. As the rainbirds and the plume interact, you will see the little smoke coming up around it, which will mean ignition.
10.
There we go.
9,
And
8,
liftoff of Falcon 9 on the Starlink 12-25 mission. Go, internet satellites, go. The beautiful VAB squeal as it climbs uphill. We had that dual view with Dr. WD-40 and Max's feed, and right now passing through Max Q. That is the maximum aerodynamic pressure pushing down against Falcon 9. And there it is again on the left, WD-40's track. Thank you, Wade, for providing that, in addition to Max's view from the press site on the right.
You can really
Now
see
we've
the
got
difference between that head-on, rather tail-on view and that side-on view you get from the different viewing locations. But that was a beautiful track from Max all the way uphill on that robotic head that Das helped to put together. So really pretty views, despite the heat haze.
And you get a great view of the plume expansion as it widens out, getting into the thinner parts of the atmosphere. I love that. So coming up, we will see that cutoff, main engine cutoff, followed shortly thereafter by separation of the first and second stages, and then we will hopefully see the ignition of the single Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage, known as SES-1, Second Engine Start 1. That should be coming up any second, and there we go. That is Miko. And that looks like separation. And I think we have SES-1. There we go. Stage 2 on its way. The booster now continuing downwards to land back on the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas located near the Bahamas, so southeast of the launch site.
You can
Next
see
up,
two very distinctive white dots there. That's the first stage and the second stage. On Wade's view on the left there, that's the first stage on the left, second stage on the right. And it's the other way around, up and down on Max's view.
And now you can see two more dots, especially on the left side view. Those are the fairings. Those protective fairing halves that we talked about earlier, splitting as they're meant to do and falling away. One is active, one is passive as a result. Everything nominal. Those have thrusters that will help steer them down and then parachute gently into the water where SpaceX's ship Doug will pick them up, as mentioned, to be refurbished and used again.
We've got some beautiful second stage views on the right. That is Florida, and you can also see a bit of the Gulf there from the second stage camera. Very, very clear waters, barely a cloud in the sky. This was a beautiful day for launching.
Which is great when it goes. Again, the Gulf is what will be used for the Crew 9 splashdown. So we want calm waters there as well for a couple hours from now. We also want these calm, clear waters for the landing of the first stage booster that you see on the left side of your screen. We're about 4 minutes away from that. Meanwhile, the second stage continuing to burn on the right side of your screen, providing more spectacular views. Now we are coming up on the highest point of the trajectory for that first stage booster. Right, Ryan?
Yeah, so we'll be reaching apogee with the booster very, very shortly. It's been coasting all the way up, and then it will start to fall back down. I believe we've just reached apogee because we can now see the speed in the bottom left increasing. So the booster is now starting to fall back to Earth, and just by that left-hand grid fin, I believe we can see some of the teal-coloured waters of the Bahamas.
Very distinctive, very beautiful there. And again, you see those little puffs of gas and things coming off. Those are the cold gas jet thrusters. Say that 5 times fast. That is little puffs of gas that are used to just help control the orientation of the vehicle as it works its way back towards the Earth. Now, the next thing, of course, will be entering the atmosphere, the thicker parts. And to do that, they use an entry burn. Ryan, how does that entry burn help slow the vehicle down and protect it from those atmospheric forces?
Well, unlike Super Heavy, which we see the engine section glowing on its re-entry, Falcon 9, it isn't built. It's not built different like Super Heavy, right? It needs a little bit more protection, so they ignite up to 3 engines on that entry burn to keep it protected, basically fighting fire with fire, as we like to say. So they'll ignite those engines, which will help to decelerate the booster, and that thermal regime will be a little bit less intense for the booster. And we fingers crossed you won't get any glowing engine sections, you know. Hopefully no fires in the engine section either, as we saw a few Starlink missions ago.
Yeah, let's not jinx it. Here comes the entry burn.
Stage 1 FTS has safe.
Stage 1, entry burn startup.
And there we go. This is about a 20-second burn. You also heard FTS is safe. That is the flight termination system. Basically disarmed since they don't really need it. And you can tell all 3 engines are burning just based on that line shape of the plume. So that looks like 3 good engines there. And those should be shutting down momentarily.
Shut down.
There we go.
And you actually see the speed in the bottom left will start to increase again because the vehicle will begin falling again, but very shortly we will hit the thicker part of the atmosphere. There we go. And the stage 1 is now beginning to slow down quite significantly because we've hit that thicker part of the atmosphere. Drag is now doing the brunt of the work to slow the booster down through 4,000 kilometers an hour now.
And 17 kilometers off the deck from a shortfall of gravitas. So
and here we go, barely 10 kilometers further, we're now at 2,500 kilometers an hour.
In just a couple of seconds, and you can definitely see that atmospheric impact. You'll also start to see the grid fins, those metallic structures on the screen, start to wiggle, which will help steer as it now goes transonic. So it is now about to go below Mach 1.
Approaching 5 kilometers in altitude, 1,000 kilometers an hour.
And it looks like you can start to see the drone ship coming into view. It's getting close. 2 kilometers to go. There you go. If you look under the left grid fin,
Stage 1 landing burn.
it's now going to turn towards the drone ship if all of the computers are reporting good data. And there's those grid fins wiggling. You have the single engine burning. Next up will be the landing leg deploy. And touchdown! A beautiful landing
Landing confirmed.
for another booster that's getting ready to hit the 20 flight mark. So you now have 1077-20 on the drone ship. And of course, there is the second stage engine, which should be shutting down momentarily. And SECO 1, that is second engine cutoff 1.
Of course, this stage will have another burn to do before it deploys its orbit. Deploys its orbit. Look at me go. English. Deploys its satellites into its intended orbit. This parking orbit for these Starlink satellites.
Exactly. Yep, that's why it's SECO 1. That will be SECO 2, which happens usually about 45 to 50 minutes later, followed shortly by the deployment. And eventually, those satellites will work their way up into their final orbit using the Hall effect thrusters that each of them have built into those satellites. Oh, man, that looked great. Let's see if we have Max back on comms. Max, how was it from your vantage point?
I tell you what, there is nothing better than watching a Falcon 9 fly in late afternoon light with the sun at your back. That was absolutely gorgeous. And actually, I'm not quite sure if you guys could tell on stream. I'm not sure if Jay had that feed up. But I had the booster for a lot longer than I thought I would, especially given the light. So, but it was absolutely gorgeous. Sound was pungent as ever. Great day to see a Falcon 9 fly.
And the VAB squeal, that screeching sound as the vibrations from those Merlin engines hit the panels on the side of the vehicle assembly building. Oh, I love that sound. Fantastic as always. I do want to, while we have a moment here, we are working on those replays. So stay tuned. We are going to have some fantastic views coming up very, very shortly. So don't go far. Hang around. I promise they're coming. And you saw how spectacular they looked. So let's see what we get. I do want to take a second to thank some people, though. We've got Matt saying, I've been following SpaceX since the Falcon 9 landing, been watching NSF since its YouTube inception in 2019. I want to say a big thank you for allowing us to witness the progress. I'm getting these as I'm finally coming in from Australia to Starbase for Flight 9, then KSC after. Can't wait to finally see it all IRL. Wow. Matt, thank you for the support for all of that time. Look at that, getting the Re-Entry Club t-shirt. Hopefully you'll be wearing those as you come on down. So thank you. And of course, it's orange, the Texas Tank Watcher shirt. Appreciate the support, and hopefully we'll see you around for those. And then Saturn Man saying, go ahead.
I was just saying, I might talk to Adrian and the store team and see if we can get an updated version of the Re-Entry Club t-shirt, but instead of one Starship, it's lots of different Starship bits, and it's over the Bahamas.
Oh. No, make it over Turks and Caicos. They've gotten it twice now. Anyway, Saturn Man saying, I live approximately 100 kilometers from the Andoya spaceport. What can I expect to see at night if the weather is clear? I have found a good spot and perfect direction. Ryan, as our resident European on stream here, any thoughts? That's in Norway, right?
Correct. That is right up in the Arctic Circle. So it's a good thing that ESA Aerospace has decided to go for a launch around this time of year, because if it was in the winter, then it would be, eternal nighttime for weeks on end. I've never been. I don't know the area too well. I would expect that if the weather is clear and it's nighttime and you can see the sky in the direction of the spaceport, you might be able to see something. So I don't have any official NSF recommendations for you, but I would just say, keep your fingers crossed, look in the general direction, the vicinity of the spaceport. You might see something. Also depends how far the rocket gets, because setting expectations, this is going to be ESA's first launch of Spectrum, right? This is a debut flight, not only for the company, but also for the launch vehicle. So we don't know how far it's going to get. We have absolutely nothing to base our expectations on. So I'd say just look in the general direction, keep your fingers crossed, and if you get anything cool, then send it our way.
Exactly. Yes. Send it to us on all the socials: Facebook, Instagram, X, Threads, Blue Sky, TikTok. I'm starting to get them all down now, getting all 6 of them memorized. But yeah, and of course, for launch updates, I'm sure our social team will also be keeping us updated, since again, this is a first for ISAR, an actual ground-based orbital launch from European soil. It's been a while. No shame to Virgin Orbit, but anyway, those replays are incoming, so stay tuned. Momentarily, we will have those for you. And now, next up, Ryan, is the Crew 9 splashdown. What's the timeline for that?
Indeed. So we have Crew 9 with Alexander Gurbanov, the Commander Nick Hague, and our Starliner friends Butch and Sunny. That's looking to splash down. I may have accidentally closed my tab that had the NASA infographic with all of the timings on it, so I'm going to stall momentarily whilst I bring that back up. Thank you very much for loading X. So splashdown is going to be approximately 16:50, 51:52 Central Daylight Time. That'll be 17:50-ish Eastern Time. Let's add 4 more hours onto that. and that will be, what is that, 2150-ish universal time. You can do your time zone conversions based off of that. So in about 2-ish hours time, just shy of 2 hours, we should see the splashdown. Re-entry beginning about 5-10-ish minutes earlier.
There you go. And so that is what we will keep an eye on. Of course, waiting for them to give the confirmation that they will do that final deorbit burn, jettison the trunk, and then have that entry interface and work its way down. A lot of factors go into that, including weather at all of the splashdown sites. But it seems like all of the recovery assets are where they need to be for it. I believe it was trying to think if it was Megan or Shannon that was already located there. It is Megan, the capsule recovery vessel that is currently off the coast of the Tallahassee, Apalachicola area. I just like saying Apalachicola and Steenhatchee. So somewhere in that range in the Gulf. So that will hopefully be happening soon. And you see the wildlife there. Just another beautiful day at the Cape. And we'll get those beautiful views from the Cape right back at you very soon here. I mean, this is an exciting time in spaceflight. And I believe, so exciting, in fact, that we have replays. Let's take a look. This one, of course, from our fleet cam over at Rusty's at the port. Always a great place to get some food and watch some rockets. Fortunately, was that Saga Welco right in the way of where the boosters are being worked on, but at least you could see the launch smack dab in the middle there. Oh, this is when you get skies this clear, there is nothing like it. I mean, Max, we've gotten lucky with clear skies for like 3 launches in a row now.
We have, and it's also worth mentioning that we have not yet entered the rainy season here in Florida. And essentially what that is when it begins to get really warm outside, typically early spring into very late fall, usually we can expect some showers and thunderstorms about every afternoon or between 3 and 5 p.m. And thankfully we are not at that time yet, so the skies remain pleasant to look at and also pleasant for launch viewing. But we are rapidly approaching that time of the year where we are going to be entering the rainy season.
Yes, and I mean, the good and bad of the rainy season is that typically it's a very specific window during the day, usually early to mid, sometimes late afternoon, usually around 3 o'clock. And a lot of times with those showers, we always say if you don't like the weather in Florida, wait 5 minutes because they move very rapidly away during that time. So yes, it's terrible for forecasting launches, but sometimes you can find a gap. And this is Max's track that we're taking a look at on the left side of your screen. The patented Max Tracks TM. Copyright, all rights reserved. Look at how sharp that is, too. It's a little hard sometimes with the heat haze towards the base of the rocket, but, I mean, as it gets higher up, that is sharp. Everyone go crazy about a sharp-dressed Falcon. No? The silence is deafening. Anyway! Brian, help bail me out here. This is spectacular views.
I think Falcon 9 is going to bail you out there, Sawyer, because we have some beautiful audio replay.
Ooh, here we go. I love how you can tell that exact moment when it approaches max Q. It's right around that transonic phase, right around when you start to see that plume expansion, that giant puff of smoke that comes out there. That's usually about the time that as it's passing through towards Mach 1 and beyond, it also encounters max Q, the maximum aerodynamic pressure. Gives you a great indication of where you are in flight, just seeing that.
These are about perfect conditions to track a rocket, especially with the sun at our back and a clear blue sky to contrast against the white tank structure of Falcon 9. So about as good as it gets today, folks.
Except for that one cloud, yes.
Except for that one cloud.
But yeah, the track continuing with a long track on this one, coming up on the replay of main engine cutoff there. And you could see that even the plume expansion, not just the engines themselves, but the smoke trail kind of behind it. And now this is where we would come up on MECO, stage step, and second engine ignition, which we should be able to see all of those from this vantage point too. In fact, you can see now that second plume starting, that is that second engine start, and then the puffs. Look at the puffs there from the cold gas jet thrusters on stage 1. Wow. It makes it so easy to see both of them at the same time. It's spectacular.
Yeah, and actually for a while I had both the first stage, stage 2, and then also the fairings all in frame at once. It became more difficult to keep in frame as they got dimmer and smaller in the frame and also lower on the horizon. But I had them in there for a while, and hopefully y'all can see that.
Oh, we definitely can. That's for sure. It helps with the gas puffs. And then it looks like there are the two fairing dots as well. See one in the bottom, one on the top, kind of just to the left of that bright dot. Those are the fairing halves. Which, Ryan, can you kind of talk about how those actually come back down?
Basically, they kind of act as their own heat shield. They kind of, they're relatively light. They're quite big. They act as a sail, so they kind of drift through the atmosphere. SpaceX has published some awesome video before from one of the onboard cameras from one of the fairing halves. They then position themselves, steer themselves with thrusters, descend into the ocean, and then before they get to the ocean, they actually have this big parafoil that they deploy. Originally, they tried to catch them with a big fishing net, but in the sky on a boat. That didn't really work most of the time. So instead, they realized they can just scoop them out of the ocean, and the fairings, are good enough after the salt water doesn't actually corrode them that much. So much to Gav, much to his disappointment, they decided to forego the net catching mechanism and instead now just scoop them out of the ocean with their support ships Bob and Doug.
Yes, they were named Miss Tree and Miss Chief, which I never understood the naming until I actually just said them continuously. It was Mystery and Mischief. So, anyway, this is Wade's track. That's Dr. WD40 over on Twitch, rolling out and thankfully offering us his views as well. And again, it's a great comparison. You had Max, who had the directly underneath it kind of head-on view, and then this, especially for the southeasterly launches, you really get an idea of that trajectory from the side-on view. It is such a great comparison. And again, their transonic area, max Q area, a little less obvious, but now's when the plume really starts to expand to that point. These are fantastic. Also, in terms of being in saltwater, they're actually not in the saltwater for that long. I mean, Doug usually comes and picks them up within a day, sometimes a little longer, but
yeah, this is the more side-on profile I was talking about earlier for those who were south of the Launchpad. This is about what you would have seen as the exhaust from all 9 Merlins gets longer and expands outward as the atmospheric pressure around them grows thinner and thinner.
Exactly. And again, that plume expansion. There's something so unique about being able to see both angles, the dead on and the side on. They're each a different launch viewing experience. So it's one of those things where if you go to a launch and you're able to see two of them, don't go to the same spot. Try and see if you can get that different vantage point. One of them that is more of a head-on view or going the other direction from where you are potentially, and one that gives you that dead side-on view that it basically midway through is smack dab in front of you. It really changes the viewing experience. And there we go, coming up on that stage separation. Again, able to see both stages beautifully separate away, and then keep an eye out for those fairing halves too, which you'll also be able to see in this view. So a big shout out, thank you, Dr. WD40 Wade, for rolling out and providing us these views. And of course, a shout out to our team out there in the field. Max, your views also spectacular. Thank you for the views and the commentary.
It has been a pleasure as always, everybody, and thank you very much for coming to hang out with us. And we will hopefully see you again for the next one.
Absolutely. And Ryan, thank you as well for helping me here with studio comms.
Wonderful as always. Beautiful Florida weather. What is not to love? Beautiful launch. And fingers crossed we'll see you next time for another launch in probably be like 2 or 3 days. Something like that.
That is the hope, that it will just be a couple days till the next one, as is usually the case. Which, don't forget, there's Next Spaceflight, the app, to tell you everything you need to know about upcoming launches around the Cape and, honestly, all around the world. At this point, T plus 25 minutes after this launch, I know there's a lot of questions out there about what comes next with Crew 9. You'll be able to keep up to date with everything on all the social channels. You see it up in the top right there on X, Instagram, Facebook, also Threads, Blue Sky, TikTok. If we do go live for Crew 9, you will find out on those social media channels. Otherwise, of course, we will continue to update you on that mission. So, thank you, everybody. I'm Sawyer Rosenstein. I have been your host. I also need to thank Jay Keegan in the background for pushing the buttons, pulling the levers. Don't forget, Starbase Update also coming out later. Am I right, Ryan?
Indeed, should be premiering at 1900 Eastern, 2300 UTC. Fingers crossed. I mean, I've made it, so it's edited, so
So yes, watch for that all happening today. Thank you again. I'm Sawyer Rosenstein. We will see you for the next one. Bye.
And here we go. We have liftoff.
Propulsion continues to be nominal.
R68 chamber pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, planet.
Water towers, fly! Yes!
Payload down to nominal.
Flight downside FD off. Bring in FD off. Off. It's orange!
R25! Oh my god! Oh my god!
Decollage.
What do you think?
Put that in the big bag, Eagle.
343 unfolds to go. Indeed.
We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
This methane will be igniting in the flare, correct?
Yikes. You good? Sure. We don't need any more of these.